Again, we warmly welcome all of you this afternoon. As was mentioned, the speaker is Brother Brian Steinblock from Brooklyn Bethel. He attends the Monroe congregation in Brooklyn, New York, and so we're going to give our consideration to him. Are you being brainwashed, Brother Steinblock?
Are you being brainwashed? Have you ever found yourself sitting at home or maybe riding in the car or what have you, looking out the window and just meditating? I wonder what type of trials or persecution I may have to experience before the end of this wicked system of things. Have you ever found yourself thinking about that? You think about scriptures such as John 15:20, where Jesus said, if they've persecuted me, they will persecute you also. And we recognize, because Jesus said that, we just may have to go through some type of persecution before the end of this system. And we say, I wonder what my persecution is going to be. And we think about all these trials that could happen to us and how difficult they may be. And we say, no matter what, I'm going to prove my integrity to Jehovah. When that big test comes on me, Jehovah, I'm there for you, and I'm going to prove my faithfulness to you. And we even think of Bible characters, perhaps, who had to undergo big tests of their faith. Maybe Bible characters like Daniel. Now, who here can tell me what big test Daniel had to face? Test of his integrity. What is he known for? What big test of his integrity? Okay, let's get my sister right here. Just shout it out loud.
The lion's den.
Yes, we all remember that. Daniel in the lion's den. Would you say that was a big test of his integrity? Absolutely. And he proved faithful. What about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? What big test did they face of their integrity to Jehovah? Who can tell me? Okay, my sister right here.
They would be thrown into the fiery furnace if they didn't bow to the image.
That's right. Did they prove faithful? Yes, they did. They faced that big test, and they proved faithful to Jehovah. And we think about maybe our brothers and sisters in more modern times. For instance, the Nazi concentration camps. Oh, what tests they went through of their faith in Jehovah. And we say to ourselves, if that was me, if I had to go through those things, I'd prove faithful too, just like my brothers did in Bible times, just like my brothers did in the Nazi concentration camps. And you know what? We might face a big test like that before the end of this system. We might. But have you ever thought about the fact that we might live right down to the end of this wicked system of things and never have to face one big test of our integrity? You know, many of our brothers and sisters have died faithful and they didn't have to face one big test. But whether or not we face one big test, every one of us sitting here today have a daily struggle to remain faithful to Jehovah. You know, that daily struggle is explained in Ephesians chapter 6. Please turn there. Ephesians, the 6th chapter. And notice verse 11. See if you can pick out why we have a daily test. It says, put on the complete suit of armor from God, that you may be able to stand firm against the machinations of the devil. Machinations of the devil. Well, this helps us see why it's a daily test. That word machinations literally means crafty acts, devices, evil tricks. So it gives the connotation that it may not be always easy to detect what Satan is doing against us. It's trickery. It's crafty. Now, one of Satan's favorite targets has always been the mind. You know why we know that? Because it's the very first target he ever tried to go for, the mind. Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 3. And this is a very familiar account, but we learned something quite fascinating from this account. Genesis chapter 3. And really pay attention to how Satan goes after his first victim as we read the first 5 verses. Now the serpent proved to be the most cautious of all the wild beasts of the field that Jehovah God had made. So it began to say to the woman, "Is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden?" At this, the woman said to the serpent, "Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But as for the eating of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God has said you must not eat from it. No, you must not touch it, that you do not die." At this, the serpent said to the woman, "You positively will not die. God knows in the very day of your eating from it, your eyes are bound to be open. You are bound to be like God, knowing good and bad." Here is Satan's first victim. Broke integrity to Jehovah. And did you notice how he did it? Did you notice in those verses how he put a thumb screw on Eve and started cranking down on it and saying, "You're going to eat the fruit. Eat it," and crank down on the thumb screw? No. Did you notice in there where Satan had a knife to Eve's throat? "You're going to eat it or I'm going to slit your throat." No. Did you notice he had a gun to her husband's head and said, "If you don't eat it, I'm going to shoot your family"? No. Well, what did he do? He asked a question. He planted a doubt. That's it. Is it really so? And that's all it took for Eve and soon after her husband Adam to break their integrity to God. Now, let me ask you this question. Do you think on their own, after being created by God and planted, put in the middle of this beautiful garden all around them, that Adam and Eve ever would have questioned God's right to rule? Would they have ever questioned the fact that Jehovah God, the almighty sovereign of the universe, had the right to set guidelines and boundaries and tell them what they could or could not do? Would they have ever thought of that on their own? Not likely. And yet all it took was for Satan the devil to plant one little doubt, ask one little question, and all of a sudden they were questioning the sovereignty of the almighty God of the universe. Whew, that's powerful, isn't it? Now, if it worked the very first time he used it, do you think that he will try using that trick again? You better believe it. In fact, the Apostle Paul recognized that he was very much using that trick again, even in the first century. Notice how he appealed to his brothers in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Notice verse 3. And as we read this, think about the fact that this congregation in the city of Corinth was in the middle of a very decadent society. There was immorality just rampant. Idol worship. Materialism was at a high. And all of these factors were starting to infiltrate into the congregation and affect the brothers and sisters in the congregation. And notice how Paul appeals to them in verse 3. And you can almost sense the appeal from Paul as he says, "But I am afraid that somehow, as the serpent seduced Eve by its cunning, your minds might be corrupted away from the sincerity and the chastity that are due to Christ." Paul thought back to what happened in the Garden of Eden, and he looked at his dear brothers and sisters in the congregation, and he said, "Brothers, don't you see what's happening? The same thing that happened in the Garden of Eden is happening right here in the Christian congregation. Dear brothers, Satan is pulling you away from the truth, away from Jehovah God by that same cunning spirit, attacking your mind, planting doubts, getting you to draw away from Jehovah God by these influences around you. Please, brothers, don't let this happen to you." He saw Satan in action, and he was afraid for his brothers and sisters. You think he's using it today? Very much so. Satan knows that he used it in the very beginning. He attacked using the mind in the first century, and he is attacking using our minds today. And what's interesting is that even humans have recognized the potential of breaking integrity through the mind. We're going to examine for a few moments the brainwashing process that was used by the Korean communists during the war to turn American super patriots into traitors. And it's a very simple technique, but oh so powerful. And as we talk about this, think about how this might relate to how Satan is trying to brainwash us even today. This technique begins with isolation. That's the first step of this brainwashing process. We can call it isolation, because the captors would try to isolate the individuals from everyone around them. They put them in a little cell all by themselves. Nobody around. They couldn't talk to anyone else, just themselves in this little cell. And after a while, it started to affect the individual. Then the second step of this process was putting them on a lean diet. Now, it didn't starve them completely, because they would die off. And they didn't want them to die right away. They first wanted them to turn traitors. Then if they died, that was fine. But they wanted the satisfaction first of getting them to turn against their country and become traitors. So they put them on a lean diet. They undernourished them enough to affect their thinking. Now, do you know why we know how being undernourished or a lean diet affects our thinking? Well, how many of us here have ever been on a diet? Don't raise your hand. But you know what I'm talking about. You put yourself on this diet and you start saying no to everything in front of you. No to the chocolate cake, no to the cheesecake, no to the filet mignon, and all these things. And you feel like you can only eat just these few simple things. As one person said, they could only eat sticks and twigs, it seemed like, on their diet. And you do this for a few days or a few weeks, and you think you're absolutely going to starve, and you are grumpier than all get out. Why? Because you feel undernourished on this lean diet. And then you're upset because you weigh yourself and you lost 2 ounces through it all. And you're really upset now. But isn't it true that when we feel hungry, we're not getting enough food, it affects us, doesn't it? Our thinking and our ability to reason and our ability to deal with people. That then was followed by the third step in this brainwashing process, and that was to confuse the thinking of the captive individual by planting doubts, communist propaganda. You see, they would barrage the captive individual with questions day in and day out. Questions such as, do you think you are ever going to get out of here? Questions such as, while you're here dying in this little isolated cell, there are individuals working for your government who are sitting behind a desk somewhere with their feet up, and they are making money because you're here. Do you really think they care about you, whether you live or die? Questions such as, why have you given so much to your country when they just send you here to die? And they ask them these questions day in, day out, sometimes verbally, sometimes in writing, and they would hand it to them, and they would have to write answers to those questions and give it back to the captors. And they were only allowed to read communist propaganda, nothing else. And you see, what started to happen after a while is that they would give the answers to those questions that they thought the captors wanted to hear. But the problem was, after a while, they started to believe it. That's it. That was the whole brainwashing process right there. No stocks, no firing squads, no beheading. Just this simple 3-step process. Now, how did the captors know whether the process was working? Well, there were 3 stages of the process. So they could kind of monitor how far along the captive individual was in being brainwashed, whether it was actually working or not. The first stage of this process we could call the equivalent stage. This was the stage where unimportant things became highly important. What do we mean by that? Well, the individual that was isolated in this cell got to know their cell quite well. That's all they had, day in, day out. They got to memorize the lines in the bricks and the stones and the cracks, and they just had everything memorized. They knew it like the back of their hand. And everything each day was kept kind of the same. That was the goal. Like when they would bring them their little meager meal for the day, perhaps they brought it on a tray and maybe had a little bowl with some broth of some kind and maybe a stale piece of bread that would be up on one corner of the tray, and the spoon for the broth would be on the right-hand side, and every day they would bring it to them this way. But when they started to think that maybe this process was starting to work, being brainwashed, they'd mix it up a little bit. So this time they would deliver the tray to them, but the bread would be on the other side and the spoon would be switched, and now it's on the left. And that would irritate them. They'd get highly irritated by that. Now, think about this for a second. That individual, the captive individual, did not know whether they were even going to live another day. They didn't know if their family knew where they were or what was happening to them, whether they would be loyal to their country. You would think that those would be the important issues to them at this moment, wouldn't you? But no, what was important is that you moved my spoon. That's the equivalent stage. Unimportant things became highly important. Now, that, if the process continued to work, would eventually lead into what you could call the paradoxical stage. And that's the stage where they didn't think normal, but the ironic part is they knew it. They knew they weren't thinking normal or thinking right. It was kind of the stage where they recognized when that tray came in and they were all upset about the spoon being moved. See, at first they didn't recognize what they were doing. Now they're in the stage where they know that thinking was crazy. They knew that those things shouldn't bother them, yet they continued to act that way. That's the paradoxical stage. They knew all the important things that really should be mattering to them, but it just took on a whole different level in their life. It just was kind of pushed to the background, and all these little things now became important, and they knew that wasn't the right way to think. But they kept doing it anyway. Eventually, if that brainwashing process continued, it would lead to the third and final stage of the process, which we could call the ultra-paradoxical stage. And that's the stage where the individual did a complete flip-flop. Their loved ones became their enemies became their loved ones. They would do anything their captors wanted against their former loved ones. When a person reached that stage, they never came back. At one time being a super patriot ready to die for their country, and now by means of this simple 3-step brainwashing process, they became a traitor, an enemy of what they once loved. Pretty powerful, isn't it? But the question is, does that relate to you and me? Does that affect us in our life? Well, remember when we read 2 Corinthians 11:3? The Apostle Paul was concerned for his brothers because why? He knew Satan was trying to brainwash them, basically, the same way he did Eve, and the same way that he is doing today. In fact, Satan really is using that same process that the Korean communists used against the American super patriots. It really is much the same way, the same principles. Let's see how. Who can remind me of what the first step was in the brainwashing process? What was the first thing they did to try to affect the thinking of their minds? Let's take, we had a hand way in the back right there. Yeah. Isolation. Does Satan try to isolate you and me? He sure does. From where? Well, from each other. He tries to isolate us from association with our brothers and sisters at the meetings, in field service, and opportunities for wholesome association together. How does he do that? How does he try to isolate us from our brothers? Let's go back to that scenario of the big test of our faith. Let's just suppose that You walked outside the doors of the Kingdom Hall after this talk was over. You were getting ready to go home or go for dinner or what have you. And you walk over by your car and someone comes out of the bushes just a little bit and says, "Psst, come here. Come here." And you're kind of looking around not knowing what's going on, and you just take a step closer and they step out a little bit closer to you and they say, "I have a proposition for you. Come here. I got to make you an offer. I know that you have meeting tomorrow here at the Kingdom Hall, and I will give you $10,000 right now if you stay home from your meeting tomorrow." How many of you would take them up on the offer? Don't raise your hand. We have absolute confidence that no one sitting here would take them up on the offer. Why? Because instantly a flag goes up in our head, doesn't it? Test. It's a test from Satan. Satan's trying to get me to stay home from the meeting. And I'm faithful. I didn't do it. And now we go home very proud of ourselves. We withstood that test from Satan, and we live on that for weeks on end, how proud we are that we stood up against that test of Satan the devil. And we may even say to ourselves, "You just can't put a price on the meetings. That's why I didn't take him up on it. You can't put a value on the meetings." But dear brothers, some of us sell cheap when you think about it, don't we? Some of us stay home from meetings because of a little overtime at work, where we may make $100 or $200, whatever it is. We sell cheap and we stay home from the meetings to catch up on things around the house, or because we're a little overtired. We sell cheap. And it didn't take one big test for Satan to accomplish his purpose. He was able to do it with little things, day in, day out, that we don't immediately recognize as a test from Satan. But it all accomplishes the same thing. It isolates us from our brothers. You know, we're reminded many, many times when we come to the Kingdom Hall and we read the magazines and we go to the conventions about the importance of meeting attendance and not missing our meetings. And sometimes some of us think in the back of our minds, "Boy, I hope brother so-and-so is listening because he sure misses a lot of meetings." And who do we not think about, honestly? Yeah, isn't it true? We don't think about ourselves. There was a congregation, this is recorded in the Watchtower of March 15, 2000. There was a congregation who decided to test themselves to see how they were doing on their meeting attendance. And so the publishers made up a little calendar for like a month or so, and they tracked on the calendar every time they missed a meeting and why. And you know, the brothers and sisters that did that little test of themselves at the end of the 1-month trial period said they were shocked at how many meetings they missed. They never realized they missed so many meetings before, and the little reasons that came up that caused them to miss them. Do you think that isolation from our brothers will affect us? Notice what it tells us in Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 1 about this effect on us. Proverbs 18 verse 1. It says, "The one isolating himself," notice that, "will seek his own selfish longing. Against all practical wisdom he will break forth." Well, do we catch the point? When we isolate ourselves from our brothers and sisters, when we stay home from the meetings, it says we seek our own selfish longing. Whose longing do we think about when we're not at the meeting? Our brothers and sisters and the things they're going through, and the spiritual food being digested by our friends at the Kingdom Hall, and spiritual goals and the problems and trials of our brothers that we can reach out and help them with? No, not likely. Not most of the time. Who are we thinking about? Me, of course. Me and my needs and my situation. It's our own selfish longing. And it says, eventually what will happen? Against all practical wisdom we will break forth. See, it starts to affect our thinking. That sounds familiar now, doesn't it? It affects our thinking. It affects practical wisdom. See, we break forth against practical wisdom. We start making decisions that do not show wisdom from above. We make decisions that no longer reflect a spiritual point of view or a spiritual perspective, but a fleshly point of view. Satan knows what he's doing, doesn't he? That's the first step in being spiritually brainwashed. Isolation. Who remembers the second step of the brainwashing process?
Lean diet.
Please. Yes, a lean diet. Does Satan try to put us on a lean diet? Yes. And obviously we're not talking about physical food, are we? Because all of us here, we have plenty to eat, don't we? And we're grateful for that. But what about our spiritual diet? How does Satan try to put us on a lean diet? Well, we can ask ourselves, since I've been baptized, or since I've been in the truth, has my study started to wane, decrease? Am I no longer regularly having my family Bible study? How about my personal study? The things I need to build myself up spiritually. How am I doing when it comes to preparing for meetings? Do I come to the meetings with my watchtower fully studied or rarely studied? How about my kingdom ministry? How about preparing for the field ministry? How about doing the weekly Bible reading? All of that is a part of our spiritual diet, isn't it? Or perhaps when we pick up our magazines for the ministry here at the Kingdom Hall, we take them home and we put them on the shelf, and maybe we read an article here or there, but we don't read the whole magazine through, every article as it comes out. Well, that could be a lean diet. Or what about when it comes to deeper Bible topics and issues? Has it ever happened to you where you come to the Kingdom Hall and the Watchtower study article is about Ezekiel's temple vision and its four gleams and what it means and pre-shadows and overshadows and foreshadows, and we don't even know what type of shadow it is because it's just so deep. And we sit at the Kingdom Hall and we're talking about this temple vision, and pretty soon our mind starts thinking about going off to Tahiti for a vacation, or we think about the barbecue we're going to make that night and have some friends over and play a little volleyball or whatever. Our mind just starts to wander into other areas. Or maybe it just wanders into sleep and our eyes are hanging heavy. Or maybe we think as we sit there, we just don't get into it. Have you ever said that? I just can't get into the lesson today. And we just let brother or sister faithful, answer all the questions because they always know even the deep things. But brothers and sisters, that is the meat of God's Word. We need the meat just like we need the vegetables and everything else, and the milk like Paul talked about. We need it all. These visions mean something. Jehovah put them in the Bible for a reason. We have the best teaching program in the Bible in the world. You can't pay enough money to go to a college and learn what we learn at our theocratic ministry school in our watchtower. They don't teach it that deep. They don't teach it that accurate. And we have it right here. Jehovah is trying to teach us. He's trying to help us become solid, mature Christians that are rooted deeply in His Word, the Bible. And these visions and these deeper things are what helps to anchor our faith. They mean a lot about our future. These prophecies about the last days in which we live and the things to look for that help us know where we are in the stream of time. We need to be able to dig into these things and learn them and understand them. So when we look at ourselves in all these areas, do we find that maybe Satan is putting us on a lean diet and maybe we just didn't realize how much? What was the third step of that brainwashing process that they tried to use? Right there, please.
Confuse our thinking towards God.
Yes. Does Satan try to do that? Satanic propaganda? Oh, yes. We are surrounded by satanic propaganda. Is it really so that Jehovah's Witnesses are deprived of so many of the luxuries that other people enjoy in life? Is it really so that Jehovah's Witnesses don't get to live a normal life like everybody else? Is it really so that witness children aren't allowed to have fun and go to parties and get involved in school sports and do all the things that other normal kids get to do? Is it really so? Is it really so? We are bombarded by that type of thinking in society today. Do you think it can affect us? Very much so. Satanic propaganda comes in the form of apostate literature, designed to plant doubts and questions in our mind and heart about the truth and the validity of God's Word and what we're being taught. Satanic propaganda comes also in the form of dress and grooming. Have you thought about that? That dress and grooming could be satanic propaganda? Oh yeah. Now, I don't know if it's popular down here in this area, but I know up in the city where we are, you see some pretty crazy things when it comes to dress and grooming standards. There's a trend in the city where you roll up one pant leg all the way up and one pant leg all the way down. I don't know why. The flood's only coming halfway. I'm not sure, but that's the trend or the style. Or the trend for sure in the city, and I've seen it in other parts of the country as we travel as well, baggy clothes that just hang all over. Have you seen that? The baggy sweatshirt jersey look, the baggy sweatpants, or jeans. Oh, the jeans. My wife and I were shopping in the mall, and we watched this young teenager convince his mom to buy pants that were twice his size. I'm telling you, you could have put one in each leg and there would have been room to spare. And they walk around with these jeans and they hang halfway, you know what I'm talking about. And you just want to walk up behind them and pull the pants up and tie a string around it. Why? Because that's a trend of this world. Did you know that you can buy jeans in the store that look like they have been tied behind a pickup truck and dragged down the gravel road? Did you know you can buy them that way? All worn out and sometimes worn in these interesting little patterns, down the leg or other places. And they come with holes already in them. They do all the work for you. See, usually when we were growing up, when the jeans got holes in them, they went in a dumpster. One brother saw some individuals throwing pants into the dumpster that had gotten holes and all wore out. Someone came running up to him and said, "What are you doing? Those are valuable," and took them out of the dumpster for themselves. I pay big money for these. It's satanic propaganda trying to suck us into the trends and styles that are way out there in this world, to get attention, to make us feel popular and that we belong. Well, friends, belong to what? What do we belong to when we wear these things? The trend is very popular, even when it comes to wearing the hat backwards or sideways. It's very popular. And we may say to ourselves, what difference does it make what direction I wear my hat? But again, it's what it attaches us to. Who else wear it that way? What groups would we be identified with when we wear clothing or styles that way? It's very popular in the city, and I'm sure in other parts of the country as well, for the girls to wear clothes that are so tight-fitting and so revealing. It looks like they were painted on, or that they had to jump from the top of the Empire State Building in order to get enough velocity to get into those skirts or dresses. It can't be comfortable. It really can't. But that's the trends that are popular. Why? To be attractive? Well, what are we trying to attract by wearing clothes that way? What type of people do we attract wearing clothes like that? There's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, what is it? It's a duck. So if we dress like the world and get involved in its fads and its styles, can we really say we are any different from the world around us? You see how subtle Satan is in his propaganda to try to get our youth especially sucked into this world and its way of thinking by things that are important to young people, the way they look, the way they dress and groom themselves. What about television? Do you think Satan uses that as propaganda? One former advertising executive said, "I learned that it is possible to speak through the television directly into people's heads, and then, like some magician, leave images inside that can cause people to do what they might otherwise never have thought to do." Wow, is that powerful? Another advertising executive said, "We slowly turn into whatever images we carry in our minds." Well, what images is Satan trying to leave there? One recent study of primetime television showed that scenes with sexual references showed up on the average 27 times an hour. And that's exactly what Satan wants us to carry in our minds with us all day long. How about movies? One professor of psychology from the University of Wisconsin said, when sexually explicit movies are given favorable reviews by critics, it helps to legitimize not just the movie, but the behavior, taking the viewer off his guard, making it less likely that inhibitions will be as strong. It makes it more likely that people will act on their ideas. Does it work? Note this example. One girl, after watching a very sexy movie with a guy, admitted this: "I am sorry to say that night I was easy to persuade to have sexual intercourse. I still don't know what happened that I lost all sense of reason. I didn't even like the guy." Powerful, isn't it? How about music? One medical journal said much of today's music glorifies unconventional attitudes about sex, violence, hate, and the occult. Do you think this kind of music is going to affect us? One professor of music said, any kind of music affects our moods, emotions, attitudes, and our behavior. Anyone who says it doesn't affect me is simply wrong. You know why music is so powerful? Because the words register in our subconscious minds, if you want to call it that, and surface later when we're not even expecting it. You know how we know that? How many of you right now have the jingle to the last song that you listen to on your way out the house playing through your head over and over again? Isn't that how it works every day? The last thing you listen to, you sing all day long. Isn't it true that we can go into the store toward the end of December and we start singing Christmas songs? We know better. But why do we do that? Because of the power of music. Isn't it true when we hear music, it makes people want to start whistling, it makes people tap their foot, it makes people get up and think they're Eric Clapton or something and just start belting out the tunes. And, that's the power of music, isn't it? Music makes people sing and dance and march and whistle. But music also makes people hate. And music has led people to kill. One young person who got into a great deal of trouble admitted this: "My bad habits and rebellious attitude were products of ideas portrayed in my music." Satanic propaganda. Isolation, lean diet, satanic propaganda. Do you see how easy it is for Satan to brainwash us, to try to break our integrity to Jehovah God? The question is it working on me? Or remember, those captors had a way of telling whether it was working on their captive individual? Should we do a little self-test and see if it might be working on us in some way? Who can recall what the first stage was of that process that showed whether it was working? What was that stage? My sister right there? Yes, and what did that mean? What was the equivalent stage? Let's see. All these hands. Let's get my sister right over here. Yes. Does that happen to us? when we walk in the Kingdom Hall and we're making our way to our seat, and we get to our seat and we realize that we passed by brother or sister so-and-so and they didn't say hello to us. And we start to think about it and we say, you know what, I said hello to them and I think they looked right at me and they didn't say anything. How rude. And then we start thinking, you know, come to think of it, they didn't invite me to that gathering at their house last week either. And I think the last time I said hello to them, they ignored me also. And, you know, come to think of it, I've never been to their house before. Our mind starts going on and on and on like this, and we start to build this case in our mind against an individual, and it very well could have been and probably was just a simple oversight. They didn't hear us. They didn't see us. But we build it up and build it up in our minds. Sometimes we get so upset by our brothers and sisters and the supposed things that they said or did against us that we actually avoid the person altogether. We say, I'll pay them back. I'm not going to talk to them either. I'm not going to invite them to my house either. Some have gone so far as to say, if there's people like that in Jehovah's organization, this cannot be the truth. And they will walk away from the truth because of something that someone said or did, supposedly. Let me give you an example of something that happened to me today. Tonight when I came, or this afternoon when I got to the Kingdom Hall. Would you like to hear it? Are you squirming in your seat? When I walked in the Kingdom Hall and was making my way up to the stage to get set up and such, and I did meet a number of you along the way, and I know a lot of you saw me, and yet not one of you said I had a pretty tie on. Not one of you. You know, my wife bought this as a gift for me, and I happen to like it. And I'm hurt by the fact that you didn't acknowledge that it's pretty. And don't try to tell me after meeting that it's pretty, because it's too late. Or maybe we say to ourselves, I don't want to be in that book study anymore. I want to go to a different book study. The people there are not as kind as the people in my other book study. Or, you know, I just don't get along with so-and-so. Or we say to ourselves, I don't want to work with brother or sister so-and-so in field service. And we go to the meeting for service and they put us with someone and we're, oh no, why do I have to work with them? And so what happens is we start making our own arrangements ahead of time so that we can always avoid working with people we don't want to work with. And maybe we even go so far as to say, you know, I'm not even going to go to the meeting for service. I'll go out in service, but I'll go straight to my own territory and work it. I'm still out in service, and I'm still serving Jehovah, but we don't want to go through the arrangements that are set up and the organizational procedures for the ministry. Or maybe when it comes to the Watchtower study. Is our Watchtower conductor here this afternoon? I shouldn't ask that. But our poor Watchtower study conductor, he sure goes through it sometimes, doesn't he? We come up to him after the meeting and we say, Brother so-and-so, I raised my hand 17 times and you didn't call on me. What do you have against me? And we say, I'll sure show him. And the next meeting we sit on our hands, the whole Watchtower. We're not going to comment if he's not going to call on me. Or when a brother is appointed as a ministerial servant or an elder, we say in our mind, who appointed him? Don't they know who he is? Or maybe we get counseled about the music we listen to, the movies we watch, our association, our dress and grooming. Someone tells us our clothes are a little too revealing, or they're a little too slovenly and worldly. And we take offense at that. And we say, the elders don't have the right to tell me how to dress, and it's my choice, not theirs. And they just don't know what it's like to be young anymore. They're just out of touch with reality now. This is what people dress like now. And the list can go on and on and on and on. All these little things really that start to bother us and affect our relationship with others, even affect our spirituality. Now, would it be safe to say that in your territory here that you have thousands of people that you preach to? That's probably pretty safe to say, isn't it? Thousands of people. So in other words, if Armageddon were to come tomorrow, how many people here in this territory would lose their life? Probably thousands. Isn't that true? So you would think that it would be very important to us that there would be thousands of people that would lose their life along with their children. It should be important to us to look at ourselves and say, am I spiritually strong enough to make it if Armageddon were to come tomorrow? What about my family? What about my children? Are they spiritually strong enough to make it through Armageddon? Do you think that those are important things that would be heavy on our minds in the time that we're living right now? Yes. So when it comes down to it, does it really matter whether I have a pretty tie? That's the equivalent stage. Unimportant things becoming highly important. That could be a paradoxical stage. All the way back there? Yes. It's very ironic, isn't it? We know we're not thinking right, but we do it anyway. We know it's not the right way to think. We could call that the no-eyes. I know I should be in service more, but I know I should be making all my meetings, but I know I should be having a regular family Bible study. I know I should be more prepared for the meetings. I know I should be commenting at the meetings. I know I shouldn't be listening to this kind of music. I know I should get up and turn off that TV program. I know I should walk out of that movie. The no-eyes. But it's easy to excuse ourselves, rationalize away what we're doing. We can rationalize away anything if we really want to. It doesn't change the fact that what we might be doing is wrong. We know what to do. We know Jehovah's watching us. We know it means our spirituality in our life. And maybe the elders come and try to help us. They recognize that we're going astray and they want to catch us out of the fire before it's too late. The question is, will we respond to that before it's too late? Because it could easily lead to the third stage of that process. And who remembers what that stage was? Right here on the end. Ultra paradoxical. And what was that? What happened in that stage? Right here?
That was when you knew what you were doing was irrational, you did it anyway.
Okay, yes, but it's even further than that. Even a little bit further, right there. Yeah, that's right. That's a complete flip-flop. We give up on Jehovah, compromise our loyalty, even go so far as to turn against Jehovah and His organization. What we once loved and dedicated our life to, we could throw away as meaningless or even begin to hate or fight against it. It's kind of frightening, isn't it, how easy it can happen to us. And we may be sitting here thinking, wow, I have some changes to make. I may be a little further along in this process than I realized. Well, now's the time to make those changes, friends, before we go any further. You know, some individuals were thrown into literal prisons and concentration camps. Their captors tried to brainwash them, but couldn't. Brothers like Harold King and Stanley Jones, you've read about them. They spent years in solitary confinement in Chinese communist prisons. They tried to brainwash them, but they couldn't be brainwashed. Why? Brother King makes this comment: I might be isolated from my fellow man, but no one can isolate me from my God. Isn't that powerful? And the brothers in their articles mention that throughout their isolation, they remembered scriptures. And they would think about them and they would write them down if they had anything to write them on, even chalk or stones, and they'd scratch it into things. They would write with sticks and anything they could find. And they would put together their own little Bible, so to speak, of all the scriptures that they could remember through all the years. And that's what kept them strong. Well, the question is, how did they remember all those scriptures? Brother Jones said this: I'm happy I didn't miss my meetings. You see, Jehovah can draw up from us very powerfully to help us remember things when we need them. But Jehovah does not draw from an empty well. He can only draw out of us what we have already put in. So are we taking the opportunity right now to fill up our spiritual wells so that when problems do arise, we have something to give Jehovah to draw up for us? Do you think that these brothers knew they were going to face these tests? Not necessarily. But staying spiritually strong was a way of life for them. And that's what made them prepared for the tests. If you get the chance to look up the life stories of these brothers, they're very, very fascinating. Harold King's life story is in the Watchtower of July 15th, 1963. And Stanley Jones is found in Watchtower of December 15, 1965. Now, if you knew that you would be thrown into prison or someone would try to brainwash you a year from now or even a month from now, do you think you'd miss any meetings? Do you think you'd slack off in your personal study? Not likely. Well, friends, we don't know that we won't be hauled off to prison next month or next year. But even if we're not, we already showed that Satan's trying to brainwash us right now every day. Are we so confident in ourselves and maybe what we studied years ago that we feel we can stand firm no matter what? We can rest on our laurels, so to speak? Well, that's dangerous thinking. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, to beware he that thinks he is standing what? That he doesn't fall. And literally, every year, some 40,000 people are falling and are disfellowshipped from the Christian congregation. Some of them even at one time were spiritual super patriots, so to speak. But they're fallen. It's a proven fact that if we are weak, it is easier to brainwash us. And that's why strength is important. If a person heads into this situation, if they're physically strong, it's harder to brainwash them. They've got more already to start with, to draw on. Now, if a person is physically weak, how do they build up strength? Who can tell me here? What would you do if you were physically weak and you want to build strength? Who knows? Please.
Eat properly.
Okay, good. And what else? Right here? Yeah, exercise. Yeah. Where would we go if we want to exercise to build strength? Where would we go? For the deal? Physical strength? After the meeting, we're all going to start jumping jacks and lift weights. Walking in field service. Okay. That's a spiritual man right there, let me tell you. All right, if we want to build physical strength, where are we going to go to build physical strength? Chuck is all I can remember. I'm sorry.
Go to a gymnasium where other people are.
Sure, that's right. Go to the gym. Some people call it going to the spa. And after they're done lifting, they sit in the jacuzzi. And it's all part of a package deal. You go to the spa. Well, you know what? If we want to build spiritual strength, we also have to go to the spa. Our spiritual spa. You know what it is? Study, prayer, and association. This is our spiritual spa. This is how we build spiritual strength. And it is harder to brainwash someone if they are spiritually strong. Makes sense, doesn't it? So let's build up our spiritual strength. Going to the spa. This is where we need to be. So how are we doing in our spiritual spa and building strength? How about when it comes to our study? How are we doing? Well, to get a little gauge on this, I want you to play a little game with me for just a second. I love games. I'd like you all for a moment to cover your watches. Cover your watch, please. Now, I'm going to trust that there's no cheating through this game, okay? We're all brothers and sisters here, Christians. No cheating. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about your watch, and I want you to nod your head yes if you know the answer to the question. Don't raise your hand, because I know what you'll do if you raise your hand. Just nod your head yes if you know the answer, okay? And be honest. How many of you know the color of the face of your watch? Nod your head if you know. Okay? How many of you know the brand name on the face of your watch? Nod your head yes if you know the answer. How many of you could tell me if you have numbers on the face of your watch or just lines on the face of your watch? Okay, nod your head if you know the answer. All right, does your watch have numbers or lines every 5 minutes or every 1 minute? Nod your head if you know the answer. Okay, a few less nods. All right. Does your watch have a second hand or no second hand? Nod your head if you know. Does the second hand go smoothly around the face, or does it go tick, 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 tick? Who knows that? Nod your head if you know. We have some going like this. Okay. Do you know if your watch has a gemstone on the face? Do you know what kind of gemstone it is? Does your watch have the date on the front? Does it have the day of the week on the front? How many of you know if your watch has in fine print on it water resistant? Or wait, does it say water repellent? Or maybe it says waterproof. Do you know which one? Nod your head if you know which one. Okay. Go ahead and look at your watch. Cover it up. Cover it up. Cover it up. Now, by a nod of the head, how many could tell me what time it is? Nod your head if you can tell me what time it is. Okay, let's analyze this little demonstration for a minute. How many of you knew the answer to all of the questions I asked you about your watch? Please raise your hand. And I want you to look around, friends, and see how many hands are up. Raise your hands high. I want to see who knew the answer to every question I asked about the watch. Wow, we've got only about 10 people, I would say, that raised their hand. Y'all being honest with me now, aren't you? Okay. All right, that's good. Now, how many of you, by a raise of your hand, knew what time it was when I asked you what time it is? Look around, see who knew. We're only talking maybe about 15 people or so out of this whole group here knew what time it is. Wow, what do we learn from this illustration? You know why I thought you should know the answer to all those questions that I asked you about your watch? Think about how many times you look at your watch during the day, every day. Literally dozens and dozens and dozens of times. You would think you would know the answer to every little tiny question about your watch. You look at it enough times. But we didn't. Why? Why did most of you not know the answer to all those questions about your watch? Who can tell me?
Usually look at the watch just to see what time it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Isn't that true? Now, on the flip side of the issue, why is it when I asked you what time it is, most of you couldn't tell me what time it is?
Because we were looking at it for a different reason.
What reason?
Trying to figure out the details.
Yes, that's right. Now, how do we relate that to our personal study? There are two extremes in personal study, and sometimes a lot of us fall into one of those categories. There are those of us who are in the habit, routinely, we go to our study and we zip through the watchtower or whatever, and we just do it so surface-like that we never dig down into the deeper things of our study. Isn't that true? It's just very surface. Just like looking at that watch. We look at it, we look at it, we look at it. Isn't it true that you can look at your watch and then about 10 seconds later you look at it again as if you haven't seen it for 3 hours? Why? Because we look at it so surface, we don't even realize it's just kind of habitual. In fact, we look at the watch so habitually that even when we're not wearing one, all day long, we'll look at the freckles or hairs on our arm to see what time it is. That's how habitual it is. And our study can get that way. It's habitual, but it's very, very surface. Whereas some of us are the exact opposite. Some of us know all the little intricate details about the kings and how long they reigned and even their height and weight and shoe size. And we're the type of person that everyone wants for trivial pursuit. But when it comes to the main reason we study, we don't get it. We don't see what time it is spiritually. We don't study and draw from our study the fact that we are so deep into the end of this system, and we let our lives get cluttered with things and material things. We let our focus get off track so that we don't have spiritual interests first in our life. We don't look at the main reason we wear our spiritual watch, or the main reason we study to draw closer to Jehovah. We're going after some of these little details, but we fail to get main principles from the Bible, like marry only in the Lord, to watch our association, to be busy in the preaching activity. All of these things that are the reason we study the Bible. See, when we sit down to study God's Word, the Bible, it should move us. It should motivate us. It should touch something inside us. It should draw us closer to our God Jehovah. Brother Sidlick of the governing body once said that our study of the Bible should be so intense, and we should be so busy studying the Bible and looking up the Scriptures and reading and meditating. And we have our study copy of the Bible that is so used that when we set it down on its spine and just let it open, it opens to the Scripture we were looking for. Now, obviously, that's a stretch. But don't you feel like your study copy of the Bible, it just knows you. You've been to the Scriptures so many times, and it just is comfortable. And if you lose that Bible, you feel like your right arm was cut off, because it's your study copy. Can we say that? Do we have a study copy that we use and we use and we use, that draws us closer and closer to Jehovah God? That personal study program has to start with our Bible reading. This is God's Word. This is where it starts. Daily Bible reading. We can't emphasize how important that is for our spirituality. Now, we could sit down and read the Bible maybe for 6 hours one day and benefit, but then we put it up on the shelf and we don't pick it up again for days on end or weeks on end, and then we pick it up and we read again. Do you think we benefit from that? Well, we benefit when we read the Bible, yes. But when we read it daily, we truly get the benefit. It's much like going to the doctor. If you have an ailment and you need to get healed, and he gives you some antibiotic or pills to take for your ailment, and you read the label and it says, take 1 pill daily for 10 days. Well, do you go home and say, I'm a very busy person and I may forget tomorrow, or I just don't have time to take the pills, and so I'll take them all right now? Obviously, we don't do that, because our body needs that trickle effect of the medication. And that's what helps to solve the problem that we have. And that's the way that the Bible, reading the Bible, works. It's that trickle effect of spiritual thinking every day. Then all day long we can meditate on it, think about it, apply it to decisions we need to make, circumstances we face. And it helps us to be a spiritual person and go through whatever difficult things we have to face that day. That spiritual program can really start also with our daily text each morning. Now, some people may say, how important is the daily text? I don't even really remember what I read. I mean, how many of you here remember what the daily text was a year ago today? Anybody? How about a month ago today? How about last week Saturday? Anybody? How about tomorrow? How about yesterday's daily text? Anyone remember what yesterday's day text was? How about this morning? Hopefully we all remember this morning. So how important could the daily text be if we don't even remember it from yesterday? Well, let me ask you this. How many of you remember what you ate for dinner a year ago today? Or last month? Or last week? Hopefully you remember what you had for dinner yesterday. But do you catch the point? See, it's not so important whether we remember what we ate. It's just the fact that we ate regularly every day. And that's how it is spiritually too, with our day text and such. We may not remember certain little things for years to come, but it's that daily intake of spiritual food that keeps us spiritually healthy. So how is my S in my spiritual spa? How is my study? How about the P in our spiritual spa, our prayer? See, this is the intimate part of our relationship with Jehovah. This is the part where we can talk to Jehovah about anything and everything. Things that we would not tell any other human being, we can tell Jehovah. And we can talk to Him about it. We can pour our heart out with tears. One sister once told me when she was going through a difficult situation, in a very special prayer to Jehovah, I told Him this and this and that. And I thought that was an interesting phrase. She remembered a specific prayer and it was special to her. Do you have any prayers that were special to you that you made to Jehovah? See, it shows how deep and close our relationship is with Him, that He is our intimate friend. Some who fall into wrongdoing admit the first thing they gave up was what? Prayer. And that's like disconnecting ourselves from Jehovah God. It's like pulling the plug on an electrical appliance. When we plug into Jehovah and pray to Him, that's where our Holy Spirit comes from. That's where our strength and power comes from to deal with problems. So we quit praying, we pulled the plug. How do we expect to deal with problems and cope with trials and situations in our life? Our thinking begins to deteriorate. Our resistance weakens, and we can find ourselves doing things we never thought we would do because we pulled the plug on Jehovah. If Jehovah really is our best friend, our prayers will show that. Have you ever noticed how you can walk by someone having a conversation and recognize pretty quickly whether the two talking are real close friends or just acquaintances by their conversation? Well, if someone heard you praying to Jehovah, would they think that you are close, deep friends or just acquaintances? Something to think about. How about the A in our spiritual spa, association, particularly when it comes to our meetings like we talked about. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says, not to forsake the gathering of ourselves together. We need to be at our meetings. And that point is driven home over and over and over again. And it isn't always just to learn new things that we come to the meeting. How many of you, when you ate breakfast this morning, ate for the very first time eggs or cereal or milk? Probably not. You eat the same things day in and day out, isn't it true? But it doesn't mean you stop eating just because it's the same thing. So we don't stop coming to the meetings just because it may not always be new things that we learn. We need reminders. That's the bottom line. In fact, studies have revealed that when we hear something 5 times, we're 25 times more likely to remember it. That's why we need reminders. And some may think, well, I go to the meetings, but boy, some of the speakers are just a little bit on the dull side. I'm a little bit bored if you really want to be honest about it. But remember this. There is nourishment even in a dry piece of toast. We still need to be here at our meetings. Coming to the meetings builds strength and confidence in us. There is strength in numbers. When you came to the hall today, didn't it touch you and move you that there are so many people here all worshiping together? Now, if you came to the meeting today and it was just you and me, do you think you'd benefit from the meeting? I hope you'd get something out of it. I really do. But don't you think that you benefit more when you look around and see all your brothers and sisters here? When you look around and see brothers and sisters with smiles on their faces and they're showing their pearly whites and they got a gleam in their eye, and yet sometimes we have no idea of the pressures and stresses and trials that are going on behind that smile that you see. But when we start to think about the fact that I'm here despite my pressures and trials and tribulations, my life isn't easy, and we recognize it's the same way for all of those that are here. And then we look around and see all of these brothers and sisters who are here despite all the difficulties it took. Some had everything they could do to get here to the meeting tonight because of the things they go through. And yet we're all here together because we love Jehovah. We love one another. It's a brotherhood that no one else on the surface of the earth has. We love our brothers and sisters, and so we're built up and encouraged when we come here to the hall and we worship together. Think about how encouraged we are when we go to the circuit assemblies or the district conventions and see thousands of our brothers and sisters all worshiping together, or if you've ever experienced an international convention, what a tremendously life-changing experience that can be, to be amidst our brothers from all over the world, all serving Jehovah together. That is strengthening to us. Jehovah knows we need that, and that's why He tells us to never neglect meeting together. There's an experience of a brother who had started to become inactive. He stayed away from the meetings. They rarely saw him at the meetings, and he was inactive in the ministry. And one day, one of the elders went by his home for a shepherding visit on him. And he walked in the door, and the brother was just sitting in his living room in front of his fireplace. And the elder walked into the home. He walked over and exchanged greetings with the brother and sat down in front of the fireplace and just sat there with him, watching the fire burn. And the elder reached over and grabbed the tongs, if you want to call it that, next to the fireplace. And he reached inside the fireplace and he took a coal, burning hot coal, and he slid it over to the side, all by itself, and just let it be. And they sat together and watched. And pretty soon, what happened to that coal? Well, it lost its red gleam and got white and chalky and cold and just sat there. Then the elder grabbed that piece of coal and just slowly slid it back over into the middle of the fire again. And they watched. Pretty soon that coal started to heat up, and pretty soon it got red, and then it burst into flames, and it got that bright red glow back. And then the elder stood up and walked over to the brother and gave him a hug and said, "We miss you." And he left. And it touched that brother deeply. And he started going back to the meetings and got himself right back where he belongs. But do we catch the point? Friends, we need each other. And Jehovah knows we need each other. Don't neglect your association with one another. We need to be here together. I looked in the index under examples of those who have to work very, very hard to get to their meetings in other places in this country and around the world. I found some of the titles of these articles very fascinating. It showed how much some of these friends treasure their meetings. Let me just read you a couple of the titles of the articles I found. 70-year-old woman wades and walks 6 miles. Despite parental beatings. Changes job. 9 miles on crutches. Paralytic builds a cart. Spends days' wages each week. 10-hour trip. Travel 4 hours by buggy or horseback. 2-mile wheelbarrow ride. Walks 7 miles with 6 children. Does it sound like these friends appreciate their meetings? You better believe it. The question is, do I have that type of appreciation for my meetings and association with my brothers and sisters here at the Kingdom Hall? We need to build strength right now, brothers and sisters, right now, while we have the opportunity. We can't afford to wait for that big test that may or may not come upon us before the end of this system. Remember those brothers we talked about in the beginning of our talk? Daniel and the 3 Hebrews? Yes, they faced big tests of their faith, and they were faithful, but they had to face smaller ones before they got to the big one. Who remembers what smaller tests in comparison they faced before they got to their big test? Let's see, who haven't I got yet? Okay, please.
I was thinking of the 3 Hebrews, the young men, how they were tested by their diet.
Yes, that's right. See, they were trying to get assimilated into Babylonian culture, so day in, day out, they had to deal with going to the feasts and all the food that looked good to them probably, but they knew that Jehovah didn't approve of that, and they had to fight that every day. They tried to educate them into the religious teachings of Babylon and all of its educational ways, so they had to fight that every day. And they passed that test every day before they got to the big test that we read about and proved their integrity. I thought one brother down at Bethel put it nice when he said every day when he gets up, he tells himself, I'm going to do my best to pass my daily test. Isn't that nice? Today I'm going to do my best to pass my daily test. Am I going to go to meeting? Am I going to go out in field service? Am I going to watch this movie or listen to this kind of music? If I have a misunderstanding with one of my brothers, all of that is a daily test. We have to build strength right now by never neglecting our study, our prayer, and our association at our spiritual spa. Doing this, building the strength right now while we have the time, while we have the availability to do so, will help every one of us to be prepared for not just the big tests, but even the little tests. So that in the end, dear brothers and sisters, you and I can be found faithful and loyal to our great God Jehovah.